In the unlikely event that you find yourself the victim of a home invasion, we are urging citizens not to take matters into their own hands. We urge you to call 911 and do everything you can to keep yourself and loved ones safe until police arrive, and be the best witness possible. This could mean locking yourself in a room away from the perpetrators, hiding, fleeing the home, but don't engage unless absolutely necessary. But as it stands, we know the best defense for most people is to comply,
Received information in social media that some of the criminals were going to take their criminal conduct into the neighborhoods. I would tell them, if you value your life, you probably shouldn't do that in Polk County, because the people of Polk County like guns. They have guns. I encourage them to own guns, and they're going to be in their homes tonight with their guns loaded. And if you try to break into their homes to steal, to set fires, I'm highly recommending they blow you back out of the house with their guns. So leave the community alone.
Bam! First of all, I've been in Canada. I like Canadians. The ones I've met are nice people. And I'm sorry your nation is effed. Canada has, of course, imported a vastly greater number of third world migrants proportional to their population than even has the U.S. They are awash in third world Indians. And when you import the third world, what do you get, folks? You also import third world crime. Anybody think these home invasions are being committed by cultural Canadians? I would think not. Be the best victim possible. So, a Canadian police chief, we just saw him, urged his nation's citizens that if they find themselves confronted by an invader in their home, be the best victim possible. He said be the best witness possible. But what's he really mean? Comply with a home invader? You think the home invader broke in to do nice things to you? To your wife? To your children? Just be the best victim possible. And of course, unfortunately for Canada, they've long ago lost any resemblance of the right to keep and bear arms. They're largely disarmed of firearms. In fact, there was a case recently, I wasn't able to find it on quick notice, where an invader broke into someone's house with a pipe as a weapon, and somehow the homeowner relieved him of the pipe, beat him with his own pipe, and now the homeowner is getting prosecuted for an unlawful use of force against the invader, to wit, the invader's own pipe. It's absolutely amazing. And what's going on in Canada? Can we contextualize this? Recently in Canada, a home invasion resulted in the homeowner being executed in front of his family. Another one broke into a Canadian home and did this. I'm not even going to say it on YouTube. You can read it yourself. Did this to a 3-year-old girl. And the police chief we just saw wants Canadians to just comply and be the best victim. This is the Canadian pedo rapist that broke into a Canadian citizen's home and did unspeakable things to their children, to his daughter. But just be the best victim possible. Should the 3-year-old daughter have dressed up for this creep? Would that have been being the best victim possible? Should the homeowners have made the bed for him? Unbelievable. And of course, remember the trucking protest during the COVID cuck years? Canada too shut down its economy. A bunch of truckers protested, drove their trucks to the Capitol. And how did the police treat them? Well, the police treated the Canadian citizen protesters like this.
Who are involved in this protest, we will actively look to identify you and follow up with financial sanctions and criminal charges. Absolutely. This investigation will go on for months to come.
Remind anybody of the January 6th investigations, where people's homes were raided at 3 a.m. because they were standing outside the Capitol building on January 6th? These politically motivated pursuits. Homath, I always want to call Homath my buddy because we've chatted a bit on the internet back and forth, but we've never met in real space. I have to correct that one of these days. I think he's a great account. He writes, the Canadians, your government took your weapons away. They made it a crime to fight back against an attacker. Then they took your money to import millions of third world attackers from other continents. And then he speaks to America. It will happen to you soon. That's the danger, of course. This could happen to America. It could happen to America. Don't laugh. The British people being arrested for putting up a British flag. these Canadians being disarmed and told to be the best victim possible? That could happen to us. You think the Democrats in America wouldn't do that in a heartbeat? That's our future unless we prevent it. I thought this was worth noting. Anna Gorsuch, who's got crazy ideas about immigration, says only a man could say this lightly. Be the best victim possible when you have a violent invader in your home. And by the way, I covered this a bit recently. These ding-dong ditch pranks that are really kick in the door and point an apparent gun pranks. As we're going to see, American law provides homeowners with broad discretion to respond to the appearance of a home invasion with deadly defensive force. It doesn't have to be a genuine home invasion. It need merely be perceived as a home invasion, and that homeowner can respond with every gun he owns. And many of us in America own more than a few. Let's just watch this clip again, just to remind you all what it's like.
Hillsborough County officials say 5 teenagers were seen walking around a neighborhood there late Friday night when 2 of them walked up into a home there to do the challenge. The Ring camera footage shows the teens wearing ski masks. They kick the front door in there and then fire an airsoft gun before taking off.
Now, an airsoft gun, of course, is a facsimile gun. It's not a real firearm, but would it be perceived as a real firearm? Somebody kicks in your door and points what appears to be a real gun at you? Some of us in America put our guns on in the morning and take them off when we go to bed at night, which means when we're about our home, we're armed. If I'm standing in my house within sight of my front door and you kick it in, that's probably going to be a bad day for you. And I would be completely legally justified. All right, folks. So home invasion. Canada tells you to be the best victim possible. Grady Judd. Is it Grady Judd or Judd Grady? I always get it confused. I always get it mixed up. The Florida sheriff in Polk County tells you, just blow that person back outside your house with your guns. American law generally has pretty generous provisions for self-defense out in the street, and even more generous provisions for self-defense in your home. Now, we just had a Florida sheriff talking to us about this, so I'm going to use Florida defense of home law to illustrate. But the majority of U.S. states have something similar to Florida. And as bad as my home state of Colorado has become, so bad that I'm moving out of the state, they've compelled me to depart the otherwise geographically beautiful state of Colorado. Colorado in particular has an unbelievably generous defense of home statute. We'll take a look at that as well. But before you can understand how generous defense of home law is in America, we need to understand, first, what are the rules for defending yourself if you're just out in the street, out in a public street in America? You're threatened, you pull out a gun, you defend yourself. Was your use of that gun lawful self-defense? Well, in evaluating a use of force in America to determine whether it was lawful or not, there are up to 5 legal elements of your conduct that have to be present in order for your use of force to be lawful, to be justified self-defense, and not a crime. Obviously, normally, if you shoot someone, that would be a crime, unless it's justified self-defense. The word justified means what would have been a crime is not a crime if you've met the necessary conditions. And these 5 elements of self-defense are the necessary conditions. So often, not all 5 are required. In fact, as we'll see in America, in defense of your home, several of those 5 elements are legally waived. In fact, all but one of them is legally waived in most states, especially in Florida, which is what we'll be focusing on here. And what are those 5 elements? Innocence, imminence, proportionality, avoidance, and reasonableness. And what do each of those things mean? I'll just summarize it very quickly. Innocence means you were not the aggressor in the fight. You're not the person who started the fight. Obviously, self-defense is intended to allow you to defend yourself against someone else's aggression. It's not intended to allow someone to be the aggressor and then try to justify their aggression as an act of self-defense. Pretty obvious, right? Imminence means that the threat you're defending yourself against, that you want to justify as self-defense, has to be a threat that's either actually occurring, it's in progress, or it's immediately about to occur. The fist is pulled back. They're reaching for the weapon. It can't be a past threat, they punched you earlier in the day and now hours have passed. And it can't be a speculative future threat that may never happen. I'm going to go home and get a gun and come back here and shoot you. Well, if they come back with a gun, maybe they're an imminent threat. But at the moment, they're just verbalizing that they intended to do that in the future. They are not in that moment an imminent threat of harm. Proportionality has to do with the amount of force you can use in self-defense, the intensity of force. There's really two buckets of force for self-defense purposes: non-deadly force and deadly force. So deadly force, of course, is force that can not just kill, but also cause serious bodily injury. Any gunshot will be deadly force, even if it doesn't kill. Broken bones, maiming, loss of consciousness, that kind of thing. And non-deadly force is everything below deadly force that is not readily capable of causing death or serious bodily injury. And the element of proportionality requires that you cannot use deadly force in self-defense unless you're facing a deadly force threat. If you're only facing a non-deadly force threat, you can only use non-deadly force in self-defense. That's the element of proportionality. Avoidance has to do with whether or not you have a legal duty to retreat, if safely possible, before you can use force in self-defense. There's only 11 U.S. states out of 50 that impose a generalized legal duty of retreat. If you're anywhere and you're attacked and you could safely retreat, you're obligated to do that before you can resort to deadly force in self-defense. 39 U.S. states do not impose this element. This is the most commonly legally waived element of self-defense. 39 states are stand your ground states. They do not impose a generalized legal duty to retreat before you can act in self-defense. And more importantly, for this context of defense of home, every state, all 50 of them, has some provision to relieve you of this otherwise existing legal duty to retreat if you're defending yourself in your home against an intruder. That's called the Castle Doctrine. Now, that's all the Castle Doctrine means. Often the Castle Doctrine is mistakenly believed to be much broader than it actually is. But all the Castle Doctrine really says is, if you're in one of those 11 states where on a public street you would have had a legal duty to retreat before you can defend yourself, in your home, you're relieved of that legal duty to retreat. It's no longer a required element and therefore no longer a target of attack for the prosecution if you're defending yourself against an intruder in your home. Castle Doctrine. And then the fifth and final element is reasonableness. This actually has two components to it. First is a subjective component in your head. You have to have a genuine, good faith, subjective belief in the need to use defensive force as you are. But that subjective belief by itself is not enough. It also has to be objectively reasonable. So subjective and objective, meaning a hypothetical, reasonable, and prudent person in your circumstances would have shared your subjective belief. So your subjective belief cannot have been irrational. It cannot have been speculative. Well, for all I know, he could have had a gun. That's just speculation. It has to be a belief based on reason, the application of your powers of reason to evidence you're seeing before you. Now, importantly, you can have a reasonable perception of a deadly force threat and be mistaken and still be completely justified, because the law of self-defense does not require you to make correct decisions, much less perfect decisions. It only requires that you make reasonable decisions. So in that little clip I just showed you here, let me pull this back up, where you have these so-called pranksters pointing an airsoft gun into a house after they kicked a door in.
Officials say 5 teenagers were seen walking around a neighborhood there late Friday night when 2 of them walked up into a home there to do the challenge. The Ring camera footage shows the teens wearing ski masks. They kick the front door in there and then fire an...
Could a homeowner reasonably perceive that as being an imminent threat of unlawful deadly force, an intrusion, invasion of his home? Of course. Now, afterwards, would it turn out that it wasn't a real gun and they didn't actually intend to come in? Sure. Does that matter for purposes of the homeowner's justification of a use of deadly force? No. All that matters is his reasonable perception. Again, he doesn't have to make perfect or correct decisions in self-defense. He only has to make reasonable decisions in self-defense.